I inherited $24M after my son's death. His ex, who walked away 15 years ago, tried to claim it. Here's what happened. My name is Richard, and I am 65 years old. For most of my life, I never thought I would see this kind of money, let alone be caught in a battle over it. Money, I always believed, had a way of showing people's true faces. But nothing prepared me for what came after my son, Daniel, passed away. His death tore me apart, but the storm that followed almost felt like a second tragedy. Daniel was my only child. His mother, my late wife, passed away when he was just 16. From that moment on, it was just the two of us against the world. I worked hard to keep things steady for him. I wasn't the perfect father, but I gave him what I could: love, guidance, and the best start I was able to afford. When Daniel grew older, he found success in a way I never had. He built a business in the tech industry, something I never fully understood. All I knew was that he worked long hours, traveled often, and managed to create something valuable. He didn't boast about it, but I could see he was proud of what he built. And I was proud of him too. In fact, I was more proud of his character than his wealth. He never flaunted it, and he never let money change how he treated people. But life has a way of cutting things short. Daniel was only 42 when he died. A sudden heart attack. No warnings, no time to prepare. One evening, he called me to ask if I'd like to have dinner later in the week. The next morning, he was gone. I still remember the phone call that shattered me. The silence in my home after that news felt louder than any sound I've ever heard. I went through his things slowly. His lawyer reached out, and soon I found myself faced with paperwork I could barely process. That was when I learned that everything Daniel had built, his company, his investments, his accounts, all of it came to me. The total sum was nearly $24 million. I couldn't wrap my head around the figure. I didn't feel rich. I felt broken. What use was money when the person I loved most was no longer here? It took weeks before it sank in. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was also a man holding on to a fortune I never expected. And with that fortune came people I hadn't heard from in years. One of them was Emily. Emily was Daniel's ex. They had been together long ago, during his late 20s and early 30s. At one point, I thought they would marry. I even remember helping Daniel choose a ring. But 15 years ago, she left. She walked away from him without much explanation, leaving my son devastated. I saw him at his lowest after that. He stayed up nights, drank more than he should, and struggled to focus on his work. But eventually, he picked himself back up. He moved on, even if a small scar remained in his heart. I hadn't heard Emily's name in over a decade. To me, she was a chapter that had long been closed. So imagine my shock when, barely a month after Daniel's funeral, she appeared at my doorstep. She hadn't aged the way I thought she would. She was in her mid-40s now, well-dressed, confident, and carrying herself like someone who knew what she wanted. The moment I saw her, I felt something tighten in my chest. I knew why she was here even before she opened her mouth. "Richard," she said softly, as if we were old friends catching up, "I'm so sorry about Daniel. I can't believe he's gone." I nodded, unsure how to respond. Her sympathy felt hollow, rehearsed, like lines from a play. She went on. "Daniel and I shared so much once. I was such an important part of his life. And I know deep down he would have wanted me to have something now, something to remember him by." Her words were carefully chosen, but I could hear what she really meant. She wanted money. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let her talk. She spoke about their past, about the years they had spent together, about the dreams they once shared. She even tried to paint herself as Daniel's greatest love, as if the 15 years since she left didn't exist. When she finally paused, I asked her plainly, "Why now, Emily? Why come back after all this time?" Her eyes softened, but I noticed the sharpness in them, too. Because I loved him. Because I know he loved me, even when things fell apart. I think he would want me to be taken care of. I almost laughed, but the grief inside me was too heavy. "You left him, Emily. I was there. I saw how much it broke him. He built his life again without you. You have no claim to him or to what he left behind." For a moment, her face shifted. The calm mask cracked, and something colder showed. She didn't shout or cry. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice steady but firm. "Richard, this doesn't have to get ugly. I have proof of what we had. I have letters, pictures, things Daniel wrote to me. If I wanted to, I could make a case. People would believe me." That was the moment I realized this wasn't about memories or grief. It was about leverage, about using the past to carve out a piece of the present. I stood slowly, trying to keep my composure. "You should go, Emily. Whatever you think you can do, you won't succeed. My son left his will. His wishes were clear. He left everything to me. She stared at me for a long moment, then rose as well. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. Then she turned and left. When the door closed behind her, I felt my knees weaken. I sat back down, trembling. Part of me was angry, but another part of me was simply tired. Grief was already heavy enough. Now I had to deal with someone trying to rewrite the past. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. Would she actually try to take legal action? Did she really have letters and messages that could complicate things? I knew Daniel had loved her once. I knew he had written to her, called her, maybe even begged her to stay. But all of that was before she left. Before he rebuilt his life. At night, I found myself pacing the living room, replaying the encounter again and again. I wondered what Daniel would have said if he were here. Would he have wanted me to forgive her intrusion? Or would he have been furious the way I was? My lawyer reassured me. The will was airtight. Emily had no standing. But reassurance didn't take away the unease. Money has a way of drawing people out of the shadows, and I feared she wouldn't be the last. Days turned into weeks, and still, I found myself looking over my shoulder, waiting for her to reappear. Some mornings I would check my mailbox, half expecting an envelope with legal papers. Other times I imagined seeing her car parked outside, watching, waiting. The grief of losing Daniel was already unbearable, but now it was mixed with suspicion, anger, and fear. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of something larger. Emily had made her intentions clear, and I doubted she would give up easily. And so I waited, caught between mourning my son and bracing for the battle that might be coming, unsure of how far she would go, or how much more I would lose before this was over. The days following Emily's visit were restless ones. I would sit in my armchair with the television on, though I barely heard a word of what was being said. My mind wandered back to Daniel, to the life he had lived, to the choices he made, and to the people who had once been a part of him. Emily's sudden appearance cracked open memories I thought had long since settled, and stung to realize how much of Daniel's past could now be twisted and used against me. At night, I often found myself staring at old photo albums. Daniel as a boy with scraped knees and a mischievous smile. Daniel in his graduation gown, shaking hands with the dean. Daniel and me fishing by the lake, neither of us catching a thing, but enjoying the quiet anyway. And then there were a few photographs of him with Emily. I had almost forgotten those were tucked away in the pages. The two of them looked happy then, the kind of happiness that once made me believe she might be the one to walk beside him forever. I closed the album quickly when I came to those pictures. The memories were painful now, not because of what they once meant, but because of what she was trying to do with them. To me, those images showed two young people in love. To her, they might be turned into evidence, pieces of a narrative she would spin to claim something that was never hers. The unease grew worse when I received a letter a week later. It came in a plain white envelope, but the moment I saw Emily's handwriting on it, my chest tightened. I opened it carefully, half hoping it was an apology, half expecting a threat. What I found was something in between. She wrote that she had spoken to an attorney. She said she was considering her options, but that she didn't want things to become hostile. According to her, Daniel's fortune represented not just his success, but also the years they spent together, the support she claimed to have given him in his early struggles. She asked me to be fair and suggested we meet again to discuss a settlement. My hands trembled as I held the paper. It was clear now that she wasn't going to disappear quietly. I called my lawyer immediately, and he assured me once again that her claim held no legal ground. But law and reality don't always walk side by side. A person could still drag you into court, force you through months of stress, smear your name in public, and make you question your own memories. I knew I had the truth, but truth doesn't always mean peace. I burned her letter in the fireplace that evening. Watching the paper curl into ash gave me a moment of relief, but it didn't erase the weight pressing down on my shoulders. I found myself talking to Daniel in the quiet moments, out loud, as if he could still hear me. What would you have me do, son? Would you want me to fight her to shut her out? Or would you want me to give her something just to keep the peace? My voice echoed softly through the empty living room. There was no reply, only the crackle of the fire. Days stretched into nights, and the silence of my house became heavier. Friends reached out to check on me, but I kept most of them at a distance. How could I explain what I was going through? They would offer advice, tell me to stand firm, to ignore her, to let the lawyers handle it. but they weren't the ones lying awake at night, imagining Daniel's voice in the dark, wondering whether I was honoring him or failing him. Then came the second knock on my door. This time, I hesitated before opening it. I half expected it to be Emily again, but instead it was a courier, handing me an envelope stamped with the seal of a law firm. My throat went dry as I opened it. Inside was a formal notice. Emily had filed a petition to contest the will. The words swam before my eyes. Contest the will. As if Daniel's wishes could be rewritten by someone who had abandoned him so many years ago. Anger boiled in me, sharp and bitter. I slammed the envelope on the table and sat down, breathing heavily. My lawyer had warned me this might happen, but warnings never soften the blow when it becomes real. The following weeks were consumed with meetings. Lawyers, paperwork, discussions about Daniel's assets. I listened to professionals debate my son's life like it was a set of numbers on a spreadsheet. It felt cold, impersonal. And all the while, Emily's name floated in the air like a ghost that wouldn't leave. I tried to keep my dignity, but inside I was unraveling. I dreamed of Daniel often. Sometimes he was a boy again, laughing and running through the yard. Other times, he was the man he became, sitting across from me at a dinner table, his eyes calm, his voice steady. In those dreams, I always reached out to him, but he would fade before I could touch him. I woke up with tears on my face, unsure whether they came from grief or from the fear of losing even more of him to this fight. One evening, I found myself driving past the small apartment Daniel once shared with Emily. I hadn't been there in over a decade, but something pulled me back. The building looked different now, repainted with new windows. Still, I remembered the balcony where they used to sit together, drinking coffee in the mornings. I wondered if Emily ever thought about those days, or if she only remembered the parts that could serve her now. A week later, we stood across from each other in a mediation room. Emily sat with her attorney beside her, her posture perfect, her expression calm. She looked at me not with warmth, but with the measured detachment of someone playing a role. Her lawyer spoke most of the time, outlining her contribution to Daniel's success, her emotional investment, the years she claimed to have sacrificed. I sat silently, my fists clenched under the table. When it was my turn to speak, my voice cracked. You left him. You left him when he needed you most. You didn't walk beside him as he built his business, as he suffered losses, as he climbed back up again. You were gone. And now you want to pretend you were part of his life when he made something of himself? You weren't there, Emily. I was. I saw every step, every struggle, every victory. You have no right to take that away from him. Her eyes flickered then, just for a moment, and I thought I saw something real break through the mask. Regret, maybe, or maybe just annoyance at being called out. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She leaned toward me, her voice calm but sharp. This isn't about the past, Richard. It's about fairness now. Fairness. The word echoed in my mind long after the meeting ended. What was fair? Was it fair that Daniel was gone so young? Was it fair that I, a man nearing the end of his own life, was left with a fortune I didn't ask for? Was it fair that grief had barely begun to settle before greed came knocking at my door? Fairness was a word that felt empty now, stripped of meaning. The mediation ended without resolution. She wasn't backing down, and neither was I. The matter would move forward, dragging us both deeper into a fight neither of us truly needed, but one she had chosen. Back home, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat in the dark. The house felt even emptier than usual. I thought again of Daniel, of what he would want me to do. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I knew the answer. I had always believed I understood my son, but grief has a way of clouding certainty. Maybe he would have wanted me to forgive her. Maybe he would have wanted me to give her something small, just to let her go. Or maybe he would have wanted me to protect what he left, to keep it safe from someone who had already caused him so much pain. I didn't know, and that uncertainty gnawed at me more than her threats ever could. Weeks stretched into months, and the case loomed larger. Friends urged me to settle, to pay her off so she would disappear. It's just money, one of them said. Give her a piece and be done with it. But to me, it wasn't just money. It was Daniel's legacy. It was his life's work. To hand any of it over felt like betraying him. Yet the weight grew heavier each day. My sleep became restless, my meals untouched. The house felt colder, lonelier. And through it all, I could sense Emily's presence, pressing closer, waiting for me to falter. One night, I sat at my desk, staring at a stack of papers my lawyer had sent me. My hand hovered over a pen, the thought of signing a settlement haunting me. The pen shook in my grasp. I whispered to the empty room, Daniel, what should I do? Tell me, please. But the silence remained, heavy and unbroken. And in that silence, I realized the fight was far from over. The true battle was only beginning, and I wasn't sure if I had the strength to see it through. The papers stayed on my desk for days, untouched, though I couldn't stop staring at them. Each time I passed by, my eyes would fall on the thick stack of documents, and I felt the same mix of dread and anger rise in my chest. Signing meant surrender, but refusing meant war. And I didn't know which path would break me more. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I poured myself another glass of whiskey and sat in Daniel's old armchair. It still smelled faintly of him, or maybe that was just my mind playing tricks. I closed my eyes and thought about all the times I had sat across from him in this very room. The sound of his laugh, the way he would tap his fingers on the armrest when he was deep in thought, the warmth in his voice whenever he said, "Dad." Those memories were all I had left, and now Emily was trying to intrude on even those. Every time her name came up in a document or a conversation, it was like she was rewriting his story, pulling herself back into a life she had chosen to abandon. It felt like an insult to his memory, and yet the world seemed ready to entertain her claim, as if love from long ago could outweigh the years of absence. I tried to distract myself with ordinary tasks. Grocery shopping, tidying the house, even taking walks around the neighborhood. But no matter what I did, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was closing in on me. Neighbors would nod and smile, unaware that inside my chest a storm was raging. Sometimes I wanted to tell them everything, to pour it all out, but the words stuck in my throat. This wasn't something small. This was my son's life, his legacy, and it felt too heavy to share casually. The first court hearing arrived sooner than I expected. Walking into that room was like stepping into a cold and unfamiliar world. The polished wood, the rows of benches, the judge's seat towering over us, it all felt intimidating. Emily was there, sitting with her lawyer, her posture perfect, her face calm. She didn't look at me at first, but when she finally did, her eyes held no warmth, no grief, only determination. The proceedings began, and her lawyer wasted no time painting a picture of Emily as a woman who had been integral to Daniel's success. He spoke of the years they had lived together, of the sacrifices she had supposedly made, of the emotional support she had given him in his early days of building his company. He made her sound like a partner who had stood by him until the end, not someone who had walked away 15 years before his death. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay quiet. My lawyer reminded me beforehand not to interrupt, no matter how twisted the story became. But inside I was boiling. Each word felt like a knife carving Daniel's memory into something false. When it was our turn, my lawyer laid out the facts. The timeline of their relationship, the clear break 15 years ago, the will Daniel had written with precision and intention. He emphasized that Daniel had chosen, of his own free will, to leave everything to me, his father. He reminded the court that Emily had been absent from Daniel's life for over a decade, with no contact, no reconciliation, nothing to suggest she was still part of his world. I glanced at Emily during that moment. Her expression didn't change. She sat still, her eyes focused straight ahead, as if she had prepared herself for every word that would be spoken against her. But I noticed the slightest twitch in her jaw, and I knew she was listening closely, calculating. The hearing ended without resolution. It was only the beginning. Dates were set for future proceedings, and both sides were told to prepare evidence. I walked out of the courtroom with my heart pounding, my legs unsteady. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have been, and I realized how exhausting it was just to stand in the same room as her. The weeks that followed became a blur of meetings with my lawyer, gathering documents, piecing together the timeline of Daniel's life. I dug through old files, tax records, emails, anything that could prove the truth of his independence from Emily. Each paper I found felt like another thread tying me back to my son, but it also tore me apart to handle his life as if it were evidence in a case. At night, I dreamed of Daniel again. This time, he was older, his face weary, as if he too was burdened by what was happening. In the dream, he stood beside me in the courtroom, his hand on my shoulder, but when I turned to look at him, he would vanish, leaving me alone. I woke up drenched in sweat, my chest tight, as if I had been carrying a weight too heavy to bear. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some of Daniel's belongings, I found a box tucked away in the corner of his study. Inside were letters, notes, and journals he had kept over the years. My hands shook as I opened them, reading his handwriting, hearing his voice in every word. Some of the letters were from the time He had been with Emily. They spoke of love, hope, plans for the future. But as I kept reading, the tone changed. There were entries about heartbreak, about betrayal, about the pain of watching someone you love walk away. In one entry he wrote, "She chose her path, and I must choose mine. I will not let her absence define me." Those words cut deep, but they also gave me strength. Daniel had written it clearly. He had moved on. He had accepted the end of their story. If only I could put those words before the court, I thought. But journals, no matter how honest, are private, and exposing them felt like betraying his trust. I sat there for hours, holding the pages, torn between protecting his privacy and defending his memory. In the end, I placed them back in the box, locking away. Some truths were too sacred to be used as weapons. The next court date arrived, and the tension was heavier. Emily's lawyer presented photographs of her and Daniel, smiling together in younger days. He showed emails from the early years of their relationship, filled with affection and promises. He painted a picture of a bond that never truly ended. My chest burned with frustration as I listened, knowing the reality was far different. When it was my turn, my lawyer presented Daniel's will, his financial records, his life after Emily. We spoke of the years he spent building his company, the people who were truly by his side, the milestones he reached long after she was gone. We spoke of me, his father, who never left. Still, I could see the way the judge listened, weighing each side carefully. It terrified me that Emily's narrative, though hollow, could still find traction. Money has a way of bending truth, and I feared that her persistence might eventually wear the system down. After the hearing, Emily approached me in the hallway. Her lawyer was a few steps behind, speaking to someone else, which gave her a moment alone with me. She leaned in slightly, her voice low. "You don't have to keep doing this, Richard. Settle with me. Give me what I deserve, and this can end." I stared at her, my hands clenched at my sides. "What you deserve?" I whispered back. "You deserve nothing. You had your chance to be part of his life, and you walked away. Don't you dare pretend this is about him. This is about greed and nothing more." For the first time, her calm facade cracked. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice hardened. "Careful, Richard. You're not as strong as you think. You're old, and this fight will drain you. Sooner or later, you'll give in. And when you do, I'll be here to take what's mine." She walked away before I could reply. I stood frozen in the hallway, my body trembling with anger and fear. Her words echoed in my mind long after she was gone, like a shadow I couldn't escape. Back home, I sat alone in the dark, the silence of the house pressing in on me. I thought of Daniel again, of what he would say if he were here. And once more I found no answers, only questions. Questions that kept me awake through the night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how much longer I could fight, and whether I had strength to see this through. The battle was far from over, and the weight of it grew heavier with each passing day. Emily wasn't going away. She was determined, relentless, and I knew she would stop at nothing to claw her way into Daniel's legacy. And as I sat there, clutching a photograph of my son, I realized I had no choice but to keep fighting, even as the shadows of doubt crept closer. The night was calm, yet every shadow carried the weight of all that had unfolded. The air felt heavy with silence, as if even the wind hesitated to move through the narrow streets. In that stillness, the truth of everything that had happened finally began to settle in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. What once seemed like ordinary days filled with routine had now transformed into something unforgettable, etched deeply into their lives. Sajid stood outside, his eyes lifted toward the sky, where faint stars glimmered through the passing clouds. He had carried anger and bitterness for so long, but now he felt a different kind of weight pressing on him. It was not anger anymore, but something quieter, something closer to peace, though not entirely. He thought about how life could change in an instant, how arrogance and cruelty could bring a person so high only to let them fall harder than anyone could imagine. Yet, even as he reflected, he felt no joy in the downfall of another. Instead, he felt an ache for everything that had been lost in the process. Inside the small house, Miriam sat near the dimly burning lamp. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded a worn piece of cloth. She had prayed for justice, prayed for God to show his hand, and now that it had happened, her heart did not feel as light as she thought it would. The pain of what had been endured remained, and no amount of punishment for the oppressor could erase those scars. But there was also a spark of hope, a belief that perhaps tomorrow would not carry the same suffering as yesterday. The villagers spoke softly among themselves, their voices hushed as though the night demanded reverence. Some said it was divine justice, others whispered that it was simply the order of life, but all agreed that what had happened carried meaning beyond what their eyes could see. For the first time in many years, people felt that silence could be a gift rather than a burden. Children, who had once lived in fear of heavy footsteps and harsh voices, now slept soundly. Their breathing filled the night with a kind of innocence that no darkness could steal. Their dreams, untouched by cruelty, drifted softly under the watch of the stars, and for the first time, the village seemed to exhale together. Sajid walked back inside, his footsteps slow and deliberate. He looked at Miriam, her tired face lit by the soft glow of the lamp. Their eyes met, and in that moment, no words were needed. Both understood the weight the other carried, both knew that healing would not come overnight. But there was comfort in knowing they were no longer alone in their suffering. Together, they could begin again. Miriam's voice finally broke the silence, quiet but steady. "Perhaps this was the only way it could have happened," she said, her gaze fixed on the flickering flame. "We prayed for mercy, but mercy does not always come the way we imagine. Sometimes it comes through hardship, and sometimes through the fall of those who thought they could stand against everything." Sajid nodded slowly, his jaw tightening as he considered her words. "Is true," he replied. "What we carry inside us is heavier than anything they ever placed upon us. But maybe now we can put it down." Her eyes softened as she looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, there was no trace of fear behind them. Only resilience. Only strength born from enduring what should have broken them. She placed the folded cloth aside and reached for his hand. Their fingers met, roughened by labor and hardship, yet in that touch there was an unspoken promise that the road ahead, though still uncertain, would be walked together. The village outside remained hushed, but it was no longer a silence born of fear. It was the silence of reflection, of souls recognizing that they had all been witnesses to something greater than themselves. The cruelty they had endured was not erased, but the shadow of it no longer stretched as far as it once did. In the distance, the faint sound of a rooster broke the night, signaling that dawn was not far away. It was a reminder that time moves forward no matter what happens in its passing. With the coming light, there would be new choices, new beginnings, and perhaps even new challenges. But the difference now was that they no longer faced those challenges with bowed heads. They had lifted their eyes to the sky, and in the stars above, they had seen that no darkness lasts forever. Miriam leaned back against the wall, her eyes slowly closing as the weariness of the day finally pulled her toward rest. Sajid remained awake, his gaze fixed on the quiet flame, watching it sway gently in the still air. He thought about all that had been lost, but also about all that had been preserved. Honor, faith, the small but undeniable flame of hope. When the morning would come, he knew the village would wake to a different kind of day. A day not bound by fear, but by the possibility of something better. A day when the past still lingered, but did not hold the power to define the future. He let out a slow breath, and in that exhale, something within him finally loosened. The world outside remained wrapped in darkness, but within that darkness, a promise had been planted. A promise that life would continue, that wounds would heal, and that even in the shadow of suffering, light could be found. It was not the end of the story, but perhaps it was the beginning of something new. And as the first faint line of dawn began to stretch across the horizon, the village waited, not in fear, not in sorrow, but in quiet anticipation of a life yet to unfold.